They bullied a kid without knowing his dad runs the Mafia. Have you ever seen someone get bullied for no reason, without knowing that person was hiding a secret that could destroy everyone who hurt them? This is the story of a quiet kid, tormented by the cruelest students in his school, until they discovered something they never could have imagined. His father was no ordinary man. What would you do if you found out the boy you humiliated was the son of a Mafia boss? Thomas didn't talk much. He was only 14, wore a worn-out backpack, and his shoes had holes in them. He walked the school hallways with his head down, dodging eye contact, like he knew he didn't belong. Teachers barely noticed when he was gone. But the students, they noticed. And they hated him for being quiet, for being poor, for simply existing. They called him Ghost, laughed at his clothes, shoved him into lockers just to see the fear in his eyes. He never fought back, never spoke up. Nobody knew where he lived. Nobody knew who his family was. But everyone knew one thing. He was the perfect target, silent, weak, alone. Thomas never cried in public, but his eyes said it all. Every cruel laugh was like a slow stab to the chest. Still, he showed up every day, alone, in silence. There was only one strange thing that almost nobody noticed. Every afternoon, a sleek black car with tinted windows pulled up quietly near the school. Thomas got in without a word. The car drove off, but no one cared, not yet. At every school, there's a group that acts like they own the place. At Thomas's school, that group had names: Jake, Brandon, and Kyle. Sons of wealthy families, full of confidence and hungry for attention, they were the kings of the hallways. Jake, the leader, had that arrogant smirk you just wanted to wipe off his face. His father was a real estate mogul, and Jake never let anyone forget it. Brandon was the muscle, big, dumb, and always ready to laugh the loudest. And Kyle, the sneaky one. He filmed everything, every prank, every humiliation. They all went viral on private Snapchat stories that only the cool kids could see. And their favorite victim, Thomas, they called him the charity case. One day, they poured spoiled milk in his locker and blamed it on a cleaning accident. Another day, they stole his notebook and read his private drawings in front of the whole class, mocking every page. The teacher? She looked the other way, always. It wasn't just jokes, it was psychological warfare. They wanted Thomas to break, and day by day, he started to crack. You could see it in the way he walked, slower, shoulders more slumped. The bullies loved it. To them, it was fun, just a game. But what they didn't know was that the game they were playing was far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. Because Thomas wasn't just some poor kid with no power. He was something else entirely. It started with whispers. A classmate claimed they saw Thomas get into that black car with men in suits. Another said they once saw him at a fancy restaurant downtown, sitting across from a man with cold eyes and a sharp suit. Way out of place for a kid like him. But rumors came and went all the time. Nobody paid much attention except Jake. One day after school, Jake and his crew followed the car. They stayed far enough behind not to be seen, laughing the whole time, filming for fun. "Let's see where the ghost lives," Jake joked. But they didn't find a poor neighborhood or some rundown apartment like they expected. Instead, the car stopped at a large estate, surrounded by high walls and cameras. A man stepped out to open the door for Thomas. He wasn't just some chauffeur. He moved like security, the kind of guy trained to handle problems permanently. Jake zoomed in with his phone camera, but the man turned, looked directly at them through the windshield like he knew. That was the first time Jake felt something. Not fear exactly, but a gut feeling that maybe, just maybe, they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Still, it didn't stop them. Instead, it made them bold, and that's when things turned dark. Because the next move they made wasn't just bullying, it was an ambush. It was a Friday. The halls buzzed with the usual chaos, but something felt off. Thomas could feel eyes on him, More than usual. He clutched his books tighter, trying to disappear into the crowd, but he couldn't, not today. Jake had a plan. They waited until after school. Thomas was walking to the edge of the lot, headed toward the usual black car, but this time it wasn't there. It was late, or maybe kept away on purpose. That's when they grabbed him. 4 guys, hoods up, no one around. They dragged him behind the gym, into the shadow of the bleachers. Brandon held his arms while Jake got in his face, phone recording the whole thing. "You think you're better than us, ghost boy?" Jake sneered. "With your secret chauffeur and your mystery house?" Thomas didn't answer. He just stared. Wrong move. Jake slapped the phone across his face, hard. Blood trickled from his lip. "Say something," he barked. But Thomas remained still. His silence only fueled them. They pushed him down, dumped food on his head, poured water over his backpack, kicked it across the field. Brandon tore up his sketchbook page by page while Kyle filmed everything, laughing. Then Jake said something that chilled even his own friends. "Let's see what happens when your little driver doesn't come pick you up today." They left him there, soaked, bleeding, surrounded by shredded paper and trash. Broken. But as they walked away, something happened. A sleek black car pulled into the lot. Slowly, silently, the door opened, and out stepped a man in all black. No smile, no expression, just cold eyes. He looked at Thomas, then at the boys, and without a word, he pulled out his phone. That was the last day they laughed at Thomas. The next morning, the school felt different, quieter, tense. Students whispered in corners, phones buzzed with rumors, and the bullies. For the first time, they weren't strutting down the hallway. They looked over their shoulders because something had changed. Jake's father had received a call that night from a man who didn't introduce himself, just said, "Your son hurt someone important. Fix it." Then he hung up. No threats, no yelling, just a statement. That same night, Brandon's older brother, who worked at a nightclub, was suddenly fired without explanation. The club, shut down by the city for code violations. The owner wouldn't say a word, just locked the doors and disappeared. Kyle's father? His accounts were frozen. The IRS showed up at his office with a full audit. Kyle asked him what was going on. His dad said one sentence, "Don't talk to that kid again." And Thomas, he walked into school with a clean shirt, a fresh haircut, and eyes that no longer looked afraid. He walked past Jake without flinching, without even looking at him. That was the part that scared Jake the most, because for the first time, he wasn't sure who the real power belonged to anymore. There were no threats, no fights, no confrontations, just silence and consequences. Every day that followed brought new problems to the bullies' families. Jake's dad lost a massive business deal overnight. The investor, a foreign partner who suddenly backed out without reason. Brandon's parents received a visit from Child Protective Services, anonymous complaint. Kyle's mom got called in for questioning over a real estate transaction from years ago. It was like dominoes falling in slow motion. One by one, their perfect lives began to crack. And Thomas never said a word. He just showed up, sat quietly in class, drew in a new sketchbook now untouched. Teachers started calling on him more. One even praised his talent during an art showcase. It was the first time anyone had looked at him with something other than pity. The whispers in school changed too. "Who is that kid? I heard his dad runs something big." "Don't mess with him." Jake tried to laugh it off at first, but even his friends started pulling away. One of them whispered, "Man, this is bigger than we thought." Eventually, Jake tried to apologize. He cornered Thomas near the lockers, voice shaky. "Hey man, I didn't know. We were just messing around." Thomas looked at him for the first time in weeks and said one sentence, "You should have left me alone." Then he walked away. No threats, no promises, Because revenge doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it's just justice served cold and clean. By the end of the semester, the school was a different place. Jake, Brandon, and Kyle kept their heads down. The swagger, the laughter, the bullying, it was gone. They weren't expelled, no one ever touched them, but their power was gone, eaten away by quiet fear and shame. Nobody wanted to be associated with them, not even their old friends. They had learned something the hard way: you never know who someone really is or who they know. As for Thomas, he started to change too. He held his head a little higher. When he walked, people moved aside, not out of fear, but out of respect. Teachers saw his potential. Classmates began to speak to him, some even asking to sit with him at lunch. He didn't say much, but he smiled sometimes. One day, during an assembly, he won an award for outstanding creativity. The crowd clapped. He looked out at them, then down at the front row. His father was there, dressed in black, watching with pride. No smile, just a small nod, and that was enough. Because Thomas no longer felt invisible, he felt seen, respected, powerful in a way that didn't require fists or threats. He had endured cruelty. He had risen without revenge, soaked in violence. And in the quiet, calculated justice that followed, he found peace. You never truly know someone's story, and sometimes the most silent among us are the ones with the loudest strength. So what would you have done if you were Thomas? Tell us in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales like this one.